Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Fairtlough. I'm a managing director of a cybersecurity company called Kroll. Part of the reason why I've been asked to come here is because my firm routinely deals with some of the issues that you talk about when things go wrong, when information is stolen, when information is manipulated or misused, and an investigation needs to occur around it. So part of the reason why we're here today is to talk to you about, in particular, blockchain technologies, cybersecurity issues, and autonomous vehicles, and how these three buzzworthy topics can come together in a way that might provide some insight for you. And I'm very lucky to be joined by just an outstanding panel here today. So let me quickly introduce each of them and then allow them to give you a little bit about their background. Right over here to my right is Rajiv Phougat from IBM. Over there to my next over is Grayson Brulte. And finally, Michael Morgan with the law firm of McDermott, Will & Emery. What I'll do, Rajiv, you want to give a quick overview of your background for the panel?
Sure. So I am the CTO for automotive, aerospace, and defense industry for IBM. My focus is to define the industry solutions blueprint, where we should invest, and how do we adopt different technologies to these industries I'm responsible for, and what type of strategic partnerships or investments we do. So that's what I do for IBM.
I'm Grayson Brulte. I'm the co-chair of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force for the city of Beverly Hills, where I'm actively building the autonomous vehicle strategy for the city and putting autonomous vehicles on the road in the city.
Yeah, I'm Mike Morgan. I lead McDermott, Will & Emery's global privacy and cybersecurity practice. The work that I do is mostly related to global privacy issues, so cross-border data transfers, making those data transfers legal, and a whole heck of a lot of data breaches and data breach preparation. In the vehicle space, I represent auto companies and companies in the new mobility market on issues, do some blockchain work, which is emerging, mostly in the area of development projects for companies that are looking at blockchain technology and trying to figure out what it means for their business model, and oftentimes how to avoid being cut out of the emerging new ecosystem for vehicle mobility.
So I'm going to open this up with a broad question, and I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to first give you a quick 3-minute overview of that answer. So first, what are the cyber risks that are facing the development and actual deployment of autonomous vehicle technology? And what are some of the potential solutions that you can see being implemented, including potentially the use of blockchain-style technologies for authentication or control? And I'll start off with the lawyer on the panel, Michael.
Okay, so if you're talking about new mobility and vehicle autonomy, the cyber risks are tremendous because we can't secure networks that are actual physical systems that exist in controlled environments behind locked doors. The idea of actually securing a network that is essentially an IoT devices on wheels that are each vehicle weighing thousands of pounds, it not only raises the stake, it also raises the stakes, it also raises the vulnerability levels. So the cybersecurity issues deserve to receive considerable attention. And at the same time, if you look out there, and there's a lot of autonomous vehicle development and research going on, what you won't see is a lot of regulation in the area of cybersecurity, mainly because regulators are really concerned about stifling innovation and having innovation just move to more permissive jurisdictions. So we as a society have to figure out how to regulate in this space in a way that is effective and thoughtful. So turning to the second part of your question, which is what's the role of blockchain technology in this? Blockchain's really critical in this, at least in my view. I guess it's safe to say, because there's no way to disprove or to prove that I'm wrong. But it is important because new mobility systems are going to be inherently open, and people are going to want to be able to move through things like vehicle sharing programs. In the new mobility ecosystem, we expect that private ownership is going to be dramatically lessened. So blockchain type solutions can help to enable that by allowing folks to have profiles and to do things with navigating more easily through the network and allowing the different dozens and dozens of companies and entities that they have to interact with, doing so efficiently and in a way that basically enables that new ecosystem.
You said something interesting there when you talked about the profiles, and when we go to like the new mobility autonomous ecosystem, the whole key to this is like the blockchain can be used to store your preferences. So if you go into a Lexus, for example, the heating set to the right where you want it, the cooling set to where you want it, and the seat set to where you want it. So all your preferences can be stored, and then when you go to an Audi, that could be the same thing. Or if you're going on a Bird mobility, your preference could be set with your credit card. It already knows everything. So that becomes really, really interesting with the preferences. With regards to the regulatory, it is in the AV START Act that is currently held up in the Senate, but we have to be careful from the US government not to overregulate what we really don't know and to put burdens that we don't know yet. The United States is in an absolute arms race with China when it comes to autonomy now. Currently in the United States, there's a patchwork of laws in all 50 states. Some states are pro-autonomy, some states are not pro-autonomy. I'll give you a quick 30-second overview. Arizona, Florida, the most welcoming states with autonomy. California is one of the most unwelcoming states for autonomy. So you're seeing a lot of jobs shift out of California. You're seeing a lot of this cyber research being done now out of California because of the regulatory environments. So it's we really have to continue to explore. And then as it relates to all the cyber and the blockchain, I think the biggest issue is we have to get the public to really understand what is a blockchain. It's not Bitcoin. And to talk about all the benefits and really demonstrate it to the public in a way that they can understand and language they can understand.
And I think that's a great point about the China issues. I think that is a race, and I also think it's one that if you were betting right now, you probably wouldn't bet on the U.S.
No, you're right. When it comes to the autonomy race, from a policy standpoint, we're years behind and we're only slowing down. And when their government says it's a go like they did last week, in a part of Beijing, it's off to the races. And so it's going to be it's an absolute arms race for who's going to control the new mobility market.
Thank you. So from my perspective, what are the key challenges being faced by the industry in terms of autonomous vehicle? One, that the autonomous vehicle has tens of millions of lines of code, which is much more than an airplane. So you can understand the complexity of what's running in the system, and it is it is at risk because when you have so much code, there is more vulnerability out there that somebody can do malicious activities onto that code. So it's completely autonomous. That's one big risk. The second risk is or challenge is how do you prove the identity of the vehicle itself, right? So which vehicle is running where and what it is doing at any point of time is a key challenge which is posed from a cybersecurity perspective. Third is the users themselves, that who is using the vehicle as a passenger, how do you identify them, what they are doing with the vehicle, how do you know what their preferences are, what their identity is the third risk, which is from their data perspective or what they are authorized to do with the vehicle, whether they are doing that or they are changing something. And the fourth one is the physical infrastructure, which is in the car. If somebody actually get access to the TCU or canvas, can they manipulate something in there or inject something in there and be able to take control of the vehicle or make it do things which it is not supposed to do. So those will be the four key risks which I can think of.
So in terms of giving a quick focus here, part of what I'm hearing from the panel is while there are some technical risks, most of the risks that everyone has talked about here are really what I would call political, social, or maybe even trust-based issues. So as a practical question, how do we take the concept of blockchain, which is fundamentally a trust machine, a way to validate and allow for a better exchange of trust-based information, and get it to be accepted by regulators and by ultimately the public at large? What are the steps that you think this industry or this focus needs to go into?
It's going to come down, we're at an academic institution, it's really going to come down to education. So you'll start to see this year, there'll be several announcements coming throughout various states across the United States and in Beverly Hills, where we're going to do autonomous vehicle demo days. We're going to put the public in the vehicles, and when we put them in the vehicles, somebody like Mike or my other colleague here can talk about or show examples of this vehicle was secured because of the blockchain. We really have to, and to put it in a sense where the public can really relate to it. As it relates to legislators, both on the federal and the state level, it's getting the staff to buy in. The staff is what's going to drive this and control this, and if the staff doesn't believe it, it's not going to make it into the bill. So it's really going to come down to from the industry, from a full court press around education.
I'm glad we talked about trust, because if you think about how many companies all of us have entrusted with our information, how many of us would say that we actually trust them with that information? Like, genuinely trust them with the information. The question is going to be, do people trust the blockchain? Do they trust that they have control over their information, even though they provide it in a distributed ledger that theoretically, that is available to everybody? They need to feel that they retain control. And one of the things that I love about blockchain is that, at least the promise of it right now, is that you would be able to make information available, but you would do it in a way that you would actually not have to trust. You would retain the control over who has access to that information. So you would be able to, if you truly trusted the blockchain and the things that were built around it, you would be able to have control over that. So I think that it's really important to think of trust in a sense that we want to sort of move to a world where if somebody's going to have your trust, they truly have to earn it. And I think in the blockchain environment, if you truly have control over your information that you entrust to the blockchain, that would actually facilitate and be a meaningful improvement in the way that we sort of interact with other entities as we move through mobility systems.
Yeah, so I'll give you one example of a solution which we are working on, whether it is autonomous vehicle or any other vehicle. A blockchain-enabled software-defined vehicle is what we are working on, that the code or the components within a vehicle are running different type of code, and they're coming from different suppliers. And it is important for you to authorize a particular supplier who is only supposed to provide the code or updates to that specific component. Is a very complex process to manage. And right now, how it is managed is that every supplier has to send the code to the OEM, and then they will test it, and then they will make sure that the update is only provided by the OEM, and the suppliers cannot directly provide the software update to the components which they have manufactured, which is a pretty daunting task as of now. So we are working on a blockchain-enabled solution which will make sure that every aspect of the software which is being developed for components in the car are authorized and they are authenticated by using blockchain technology. Is one of the solutions we are working on, is a good example of what you asked for.
Well, let me kind of take this a little bit further. We've heard about basically we need more education, we need to convince regulators, we need to convince the public. But perhaps is there another way that we might be able to approach this by focus on the business-to-business transactions, where there's much less need to have, for example, a consensus buy-in, but more an economic value one? Maybe it is something as providing a more effective or efficient way to provide a service set within the industry, because we have so many different suppliers and groups working within the space. So just focusing on what I'm going to call the business-to-business use of blockchain within the autonomous vehicle ecosystem, what are some steps or ways that this industry could effectively cooperate amongst itself in order to boost its own support capabilities and to make the business-to-business use of blockchain within autonomous vehicles accepted? And then basically a use case to show to the regulator or to the public as to how this works.
Yeah, so, one of the things which comes to mind for an autonomous vehicle is right now, as the driver of the vehicle, you are responsible to pay for anything you do from the vehicle when you're driving. For example, when you park, you pay for the parking. When you go through the tolls, either you have some kind of electronic pass or mechanism to pay for it, or you use your credit card or cash to pay on the tolls. So these payments are going to be still required even when you are in an autonomous vehicle. So who pays for it? To enable the vehicle to pay for all these different services in the ecosystem in a B2B environment, is definitely a use case which we are working on, and we have created an ecosystem where you can actually create a micropayment system which is going to enable the vehicle to pay for these services. So you know what the vehicle is, you already know what service provider you are going to pay, and the vehicle is able to make those transactions in a secure way. Is something which we are working on actively, and we already have some pilots going on in Europe for that.
Toyota's doing interesting research around the blockchain as it relates to payments and trying to figure out standards. But the big thing I think with blockchain is that there's so much hype around it. And so if Toyota says, "Oh, well, this car is blockchain-enabled payments," to the public, what does that really mean? I think that's where keep constantly going back to the public element. But I mean, you're knee deep in this with all your automotive clients. What do you think?
Honestly, I don't really know. I mean, I know that the insurance industry is very focused on this. They're worried about they want to be able to service this industry. They want somebody to be able to get in a car for 2 minutes and to be charged the proper amount or an actuarially defensible amount for coverage during that 2-minute period. They're really focused on that. And the question is whether they can actually sustain that business model, because it's not clear whether they're going to be able to migrate from a model that is right now based on annual premiums to a model that is something less than that. So that's an industry that is working collaboratively to try to figure out blockchain applications for insurance solutions. But I think a lot of the B2B applications, we just, at least from where I'm sitting, what companies are doing is they're worried about being locked out. So they're worried about disintermediation, if you like big words. They're worried about being locked out of the new economy. So what they are doing is they're all trying to collaborate to try to think about what sort of standards need to be set so that they can communicate and do transactions, clear transactions or settle transactions on a blockchain. They don't really know what it means. And there aren't a lot of folks like Rajiv that can develop use cases, and it just, I sort of struggle because I think that a lot of the established companies don't know how to go about doing this. So they know that they're worried about getting squeezed out, but they don't really know how to do it. So they're going to throw money at it in the short term.
Yeah, and B2B use cases are tremendous and opportunities are tremendous. What we call in the blockchain world is permission networks. So they are not open networks, but they are kind of closed B2B networks which are created specifically to do transactions between those parties who are allowed to do transactions within that private network. And there are tremendous use cases. Like one of the partnerships we just announced is with the Maersk, which is one of the big shipping companies, to enable trading. And such kind of use cases are also being adopted by the automotive industry. For example, going from AV to EV, which is electric vehicles, how do you charge somebody for how much energy did they use to charge the vehicle? When you plug in your car, there are meters which are not precise enough, or they are not polling enough times to be able to, and the blockchain technology is not fast enough to be able to meter you by seconds or by even minutes, because it takes a tremendous amount of time to authorize one transaction before it is committed and put on the block. So that one side it is a challenge, but on the other side it is an opportunity to develop those type of B2B use cases.
So if we think about what's being developed B2B and we think about the implementation of the technology, we haven't really focused on what I think is the big question here, which is the human to autonomous vehicle interaction and the ways in which, human frailty, stupidity, or carelessness can cause issues or problems and get reflected into this overall ecosystem. So again, thinking about it from the investigator side point, where there's human error involved in the use of the particular the use of the technology. What are some of the ways that in particular blockchain technologies allow us to either authenticate or identify the individuals involved either within the transaction involved with the vehicle or with the use of the vehicle in a way that might give us greater comfort in being able to allocate risk or responsibility when issues with this technology ultimately come to play.
Yeah. Personally, I'd be interested in hearing what the other panelists think. I don't really see blockchain as being a solution to that issue.
And I agree with Mike. Fundamentally, humans are bad drivers. 40,000 people perished on the roads of the United States last year. I mean, that's the thing about that. That's a big number. There's a great gentleman, Mark Roskin, former director of NHTSA, and he said, if you put it in perspective like this, that's a 747 going down every week. That's the headline. People really stand up and take notice. When we have full level 5 autonomy, we're never going to get to 0 deaths. That's just an imaginable thing. But we will get to really, really low deaths on the road, and the roads will become safer. I mean, the biggest problem when we go through what I call the hybrid years where we have human drivers and we have full level 5 is that if you go around Mountain View and you go into certain cars in Mountain View, people try and hit you because they think it's funny, they think it's a game. They're trying to get these disengagement reports up and trying to see what the vehicle can do. And then that becomes a really big problem. It's just that I think once individuals go for rides, it starts to really change. Like, oh wow, this was kind of boring. I can do all sorts of stuff, and it just unleashes the imagination. And then the vehicle then becomes a platform. It says, okay, what can you build upon that platform? What solutions can you build?
Yeah, so I kind of agree that I don't think identity management is can be solved just by blockchain. I think identity management will remain an issue because you do need to identify, especially for B2B type of use cases, which are not like anonymous transactions happening in the cryptocurrency world, but you should be able to identify who did the transaction, were they authorized to do the transaction or not, when did they do a specific portion of the transaction, why did they do it. So maintaining all that traceability is possible or is the actual application of the blockchain technology, but the identity management itself is a separate problem which is outside of the realm of the blockchain technology itself.
I mean, one thing that's kind of interesting about this technology is that it does enable, on the privacy side, this idea of true choice by individuals. So in our current environment where we all kind of just sign off on privacy policies, we technically have the ability to go in and manage our privacy settings or whatnot. Few people bother to do that. Some people do, but few people do. Well, the blockchain could be part of the solution that allows folks to have sort of privacy preferences that are publishable, so they could be applicable to broad segments of the economy. So you can make some choices that actually work. And for the emerging kind of global landscape of privacy regulation, one of the main defining features of that is that it varies dramatically. Americans don't look at privacy the way that Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Europeans, around the world. And blockchain is really interesting, at least from my perspective, in terms of making those privacy choices more interesting and be able to communicate them in a thoughtful, deliberate way to a large group of folks that you interact with.
Yeah, from that perspective, Mike, definitely agree. And GDPR is kind of, some regulations in Europe are catering to that, that you have a choice of what you want to publish as your data or let somebody have access to your data. And that transaction traceability or management of your preferences are being enabled by blockchain technology. And one of the examples is BMW creating the neutral server or trustee server, which we created for them, the first one. It's not exclusive to us. But you are able to manage the policy of who can see what elements of your data. So you can tell that, you can see my age and my location, but you cannot see my name. You can actually manage it element by element or at a micro data element level, and that process can be enabled by blockchain technology, yes.
So We're coming close to time. What I'd like to do is to give each of you 1 minute, and then we'll open up to questions, to give a quick summary where you see this going within the next 5 years. Do you see cybersecurity issues ultimately slowing down and blocking the implementation of autonomous vehicle technology, or do you feel that there are solutions or an appetite in place to enable this to move beyond some of the fears that seem to be dominating the industry?
I'd be surprised if it did. I mean, I think that we'll do an okay job securing the network. There will be some examples of hacks that actually worked, and there might be some ransomware issues that affect it. But you know, the catastrophic fear of a state-sponsored attack being directed against our autonomous vehicle infrastructure, I think, you know, if I were betting, I'd say it's not going to happen. I think that I think vehicle autonomy will be here faster than we all expect, and it'll be really game-changing. And I think for all of you who are students, you should really give some thought, because the economic players of today are not necessarily the ones that are going to be economic players of tomorrow. And now is a great time to be thinking about being entrepreneurial. And I think blockchain is an area where, for goodness sakes, if you're raising money, it's a great thing to include in your pitch. But I think for those of you that are thinking along those lines, it's a terrific time to be doing that.
To sum Mike's point up, if you're a student, build it. Just build it. And from a city perspective, if you're looking to interact with the city, just sit down and have a conversation with the city. You'd be surprised at the engagement level of running pilots in cities, especially in Beverly Hills, the openness to having those conversations. So build it and prototype it, and let's have a conversation. As it relates to cyber, I think cyber will continue to be a big battlefront. It'll eventually be a war, and people like Mike and DoD and DARPA, they'll figure out how to take care of that. And I think the biggest fear to slow autonomy down is the consumer adoption and getting the individuals in the vehicles for the first time. And then it's going to shift from a cyber focus to a system failure focus. So in LA, 3 months ago, we put 724 people through an autonomous vehicle, level 2, in a parking lot. And number one fear going into the vehicle was hacking. Number one fear coming out of the vehicle was system failure. So that was pretty remarkable and eye-opening for us. So overall, as it relates to cyber, I think the individuals that are focused on securing the vehicles and securing the infrastructure will do a really good job at that.
Yeah, so I would agree with both the panelists there on those issues, but what I would say is blockchain is just one piece of the puzzle. And cybersecurity is much larger, and blockchain is not going to solve it just by doing itself. It needs to be combined with a lot of other things, including the macro issues of regulation and legal complications need to be solved. But also physical security of the vehicle, that how you make it tamper-proof, that nobody is able to mess with the TCU of the vehicle, which is transmitting the data. If you do, the vehicle is going to lock down, or simple things like that. But cybersecurity is just, again, that is also one issue in adoption of autonomous vehicles. As the other panelists said, it's going to be how quickly users are going to adopt it, how quickly you are going to accept that, yes, you are going to sit in an autonomous vehicle and you are ready to take the ride in that without any fear.
I'll just add one point. From my own perspective, both as a former prosecutor, as a regulator, and as someone who conducts the investigations, what I believe is that the focus of the regulator, the fear that has been generated around cyber, is ultimately driving a regulatory requirement that is creating a significant financial risk for failure to secure. And that will ultimately drive, through litigation, I believe, meaningful protections, because they'll simply be too expensive to ignore or not think through. However, I think we're in for several years of that being built out in terms of an active practice and protocol across multiple technologies. But at this point, I think you've heard from all of us for a while. Is there anyone with questions? Now, I do want to make one thing clear. We're really focused here on questions. While we'd love to hear comments and love to hear insight, the goal here is to make this a question-based approach. And I'll start with this gentleman in the center. Do we have a microphone we can pass up to him? Maybe I'll borrow one of these.
I'm trying to speak up.
Sure.
So in the automotive space, we've had safety standards and validation in the automotive industry for years. So we've heard a lot about security vulnerabilities, performance scalability issues, system failures. Does the panel think that we need better third-party test and validation for these things before they roll out? Because what you hear from vendors is, oh, we've tested it on our private test bed, it's ready for prime time. What about real industry validation?
There is massive discussion going with the big OEMs, the Audis, the Fords, the Toyotas of the world. Like those discussions are happening. There's discussions happening inside of NHTSA, are one of those. M-City, Willow Run, which is opening April 2nd. They're trying to make it an NHTSA proving ground where you have to meet these standards in order to go on the roads. So that's an active conversation that's happening in the industry. The one thing from the public perspective of the industry is nobody wants a crash, nobody wants an incident, and there's just such an underlying focus on safety. And so at some point there probably will be some metric that you have to hit in terms of crash worthiness or miles driven. That's going to come at some point. Just don't know when, but it is a conversation that's actively happening on a daily basis.
Grayson, let me do a quick follow-up on that. But are there right now standards on how even the reporting should occur, so that there's a way to evaluate the third-party data that's being provided?
If you want to look at the California reporting, it leads to false headlines. It's just disengagement. So we'll leave the company's name out of this, but there's a company that pulled out of California, is no longer testing there. They reported to the DMV 0 miles. Everybody's like, why? And if you talk to them, they said, well, our engineers want to push it and see, how far can we push it? And then, we have to file a disengagement. Then the market say, oh no, your tech's not very good. And so that it's a kind of a really double-edged sword. And then when you're going into environments like Arizona and Florida where you don't have to report, and there's a lot of testing now going on in North Carolina and the Charlotte area, where they're really pushing it to the limits to see really what this tech can do.
Question. So people can hear you.
Do you foresee a time when will the car be fully autonomous, meaning it's a business unto itself and it can transact on its own?
I'm going to give you pushback on that because there's multiple answers. Are you looking at geofenced areas? Are you looking at mass deployment? Are you looking at micro deployments? What do you? Mass deployment, we'll have them on by 2025. The vehicle will be its own entity because in order for the vehicle to work, it has to be completely autonomous, not relying on infrastructure. There's the debate where you need the V2X and the V2I. If you actually go in some of the most advanced cars, if you go in the Waymo car, if you go in the Zoox car, they don't need it. And that's going to be the trend that's going to happen. If you talk to Mercedes engineers and their R&D center in Sunnyvale, they're like, well, this is great, but not everywhere is going to have the connectivity. We have to have the vehicle work completely on its own.
Question. Let's see.
There's a thought in the industry that even if the number of accidents, the probability decreases by half, though the total number of miles driven doubles, the total number of accidents will still remain the same. So I was wondering what your perspective is on what the public, maybe marketing or policy or these metrics, will they need to be adjusted or how will this be sold?
I guess I'd be surprised if those numbers actually played out. I think that the number of miles driven, I think overall the safety improvements are going to dramatically outweigh any offsetting effect from additional miles that are driven. I mean, humans have been terrible drivers forever. We surely have to be able to do better than that.
So unfortunately, we have come close to time. If there are other questions, perhaps panel members can stay around. But thank you all very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you.